Karen stomped out to her front yard, her face flushed with rage. There, in the middle of her carefully manicured lawn, was a freshly dug trench, the unmistakable signs of an underground cable installation. And the culprit was none other than her homeowners association, HOA, who had the audacity to bury a fiber optic line without her knowledge or consent. Unbelievable, she fumed, her hands clenched into fists. This was the last straw. For years, the HOA had been a constant thorn in her side, nitpicking about the height of her hedges, the color of her front door, and now this blatant invasion of her property. Without hesitation, Karen marched over to the trench, grabbed a shovel, and began digging. She was determined to uncover the offending cable and send a message to the HOA. Mess with my yard, and you'll regret it. As she dug, her anger only grew. The HOA had always been quick to fine her for the slightest infractions, but when it came to their own actions, they seemed to operate with impunity. Well, not this time. After what felt like an eternity, Karen's shovel struck something solid. Carefully, she uncovered the thick, fiber optic cable, and a triumphant grin spread across her face. This was her chance to finally stand up to the tyrannical HOA. Rushing inside, she retrieved a pair of heavy-duty scissors and marched back to the trench. With a few swift snips, the cable was severed, and Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. "Take that, you bunch of power-hungry bureaucrats," she muttered under her breath. But her victory was short-lived. As she was surveying the damage, she heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into her driveway. Peering around the corner, she saw two well-dressed individuals striding towards her, their expressions a mix of anger and disbelief. "Mrs. Wilkins, what on earth do you think you're doing?" demanded the woman who Karen recognized as the HOA president. Karen straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm putting a stop to your little underground cable installation. That's what I'm doing. You had no right to dig up my yard without my permission." The man, who Karen assumed was the HOA's attorney, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Wilkins, this cable is part of a community-wide infrastructure project. You have no right to interfere with it." "No right?" Karen scoffed. "This is my property, and you had no business burying anything in my yard without my consent. I'm not going to let you bully me anymore." The HOA president's face reddened with anger. "This is unacceptable behavior. Mrs. Wilkins, you will be fined for this, and we will be sending you the bill for the repair costs." Karen's eyes narrowed defiantly. "Bring it on. I'm not paying a single penny, and you can't make me." The confrontation had only just begun, and Karen knew that she was in for a fight. But she was determined to come out on top, no matter the cost. The HOA representatives stormed off, their faces twisted in fury, leaving Karen standing in the middle of the freshly dug trench, feeling a mix of triumph and trepidation. She knew that this was just the beginning of a long and bitter battle, but she was more than ready to take them on. Marching back into the house, Karen grabbed her laptop and began furiously typing. She was going to document every single interaction with the HOA, leaving no stone unturned. If they wanted a fight, she was more than happy to give them one. First, she fired off a scathing email to the HOA board, outlining her grievances and demanding an immediate resolution. She made it clear that she would not back down, no matter the consequences. Next, she turned her attention to the local newspaper. She knew that the best way to put pressure on the HOA was to make this a public issue, and what better way to do that than to write a scathing op-ed. As she pounded away at the keyboard, her anger only grew. The HOA had always been a thorn in her side, but this was the final straw. She was done playing by their rules and ready to fight back with everything she had. When she was finally satisfied with her work, Karen hit send and leaned back in her chair, a grim smile spreading across her face. The HOA was about to learn a harsh lesson. You don't mess with Karen Wilkins. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The op-ed was published, sparking a flurry of comments and shares on social media. Karen's inbox was flooded with messages of support from her neighbors, many of whom had their own grievances with the HOA. But the real fireworks came when the HOA representatives showed up at her door, their faces etched with fury. They demanded that she immediately repair the damaged cable and pay the hefty repair costs or face further action. Karen stood her ground, refusing to back down. "I'll fix the cable when you pay me back for all the fines and fees you've unjustly levied against me over the years," she shot back, her eyes narrowed. The HOA president's face turned a deep shade of red. "This is unacceptable, Mrs. Wilkins. You are in clear violation of our community bylaws, and we will not hesitate to take legal action." Karen leaned in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I'm trembling in my boots. Bring it on, Karen. I'll see you in court." As the HOA representatives stormed off, Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. She had drawn a line in the sand, and she was determined to hold her ground. The battle had only just begun, but she was more than ready to face whatever the HOA had in store for her. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as the battle between Karen and the HOA raged on. The local newspaper continued to follow the story, with Karen's scathing op-ed sparking a flurry of letters to the editor and heated debates on social media. Meanwhile, the HOA made good on their threat, serving Karen with a lawsuit demanding she repair the damaged cable and paid the hefty repair costs. But Karen was undaunted, firing back with a countersuit of her own, alleging years of unjust fines and harassment. During the tense court proceedings, Karen found herself caught in a web of legal jargon and technical details. The HOA had brought in a team of high-powered attorneys, while Karen was relying on a local lawyer who was, quite frankly, out of his depth. As the case dragged on, Karen's frustration only grew. She felt like she was fighting a losing battle, constantly outmaneuvered by the HOA's deep pockets and legal expertise. But she refused to give up, fueled by a burning desire to stick it to the HOA, once and for all. One particularly heated courtroom exchange had Karen on the edge of her seat. The HOA's lead attorney was grilling her about the specifics of the cable installation, trying to poke holes in her argument. "Mrs. Wilkins, you claimed that the HOA had no right to bury this cable on your property. But isn't it true that the community bylaws clearly state that the HOA has the authority to make such infrastructure improvements?" The attorney sneered. Karen felt her heart racing, but she refused to let the man's condescending tone rattle her. "That may be true, but the bylaws also state that homeowners must be notified and given the opportunity to consent before any such work is undertaken. And I can assure you, I was never informed, let alone asked for my permission." The attorney's brow furrowed, and Karen could see the wheels turning in his head. "But surely, Mrs. Wilkins, you must have known about the community-wide infrastructure project. This was no secret after all." Karen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I'm sorry, but I don't read every single word of the HOA's monthly newsletter. And even if I had, that doesn't give you the right to dig up my yard without my consent." The judge, who had been listening intently, cleared his throat. "Counsel, I'm inclined to agree with Mrs. Wilkins on this point. The bylaws do seem to require homeowner consent for this type of work, unless you can provide evidence that she was properly notified and agreed to it. I'm not sure your argument holds water." The attorney's face fell, and Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She might be outmatched in the legal arena, but she was determined to fight tooth and nail to protect her property rights. As the court adjourned for the day, Karen couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she had a chance of emerging victorious after all. As the court battle dragged on, Karen found herself in an increasingly precarious financial situation. The legal fees were piling up, and the HOA's deep pockets were making it increasingly difficult for her to keep up. Despite her initial sense of optimism after the last court hearing, Karen was beginning to feel the strain. She had always prided herself on being a strong, independent woman, but this fight was taking a heavy toll on her both physically and emotionally. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, staring at a stack of unpaid bills, Karen couldn't hold back the tears any longer. She had poured her heart and soul into this fight, and now it was all hanging by a thread. Just as she was about to give up, a knock on the door interrupted her moment of despair. Wiping the tears from her eyes, Karen opened the door to find her neighbor, Susie, standing on her doorstep. "Karen, I heard about what's going on, and I wanted to come by and see if there's anything I can do to help," Susie said, her voice filled with concern. Karen hesitated for a moment, feeling a mix of pride and vulnerability. "Oh, Susie, I don't know what to say. The legal fees are just piling up, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this fight going." Susie reached out and placed a comforting hand on Karen's shoulder. "Well, that's why I'm here. A bunch of us in the neighborhood have been talking, and we want to help." Karen looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Help? What do you mean?" "We've started a GoFundMe campaign to help cover your legal expenses," Susie explained. "The response has been incredible. People are outraged by what the HOA is doing, and they want to support you in this fight." Karen felt a surge of emotion as Susie pulled out her phone and showed her the campaign page. Dozens of her neighbors had already contributed, and the total was steadily climbing. "Susie, I don't know what to say," Karen stammered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is so overwhelming." Susie smiled warmly. "You've always been there for us, Karen. Now it's our turn to be there for you. We're in this together, and we're not going to let the HOA bully you anymore." As Susie turned to leave, Karen pulled her into a tight hug, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. In that moment, she realized that she wasn't alone in this fight. She had an entire community standing by her side. Reinvigorated by this newfound support, Karen returned to the courtroom with a renewed sense of purpose. The HOA might have deep pockets, but she had the unwavering backing of her neighbors, and that was worth more than any amount of money. With the financial support of her neighbors, Karen felt a renewed sense of determination as the court battle continued. The HOA, sensing that the tide was turning against them, had become increasingly desperate in their attempts to discredit her. During one particularly heated exchange, the HOA's lead attorney tried to paint Karen as an irrational and unreasonable homeowner, someone who was unwilling to work with the community for the greater good. "Mrs. Wilkins, isn't it true that you have a history of refusing to comply with HOA rules and regulations?" the attorney asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Karen took a deep breath, refusing to be rattled by the man's aggressive line of questioning. "I'm sorry, but I can't agree with that characterization. I've always been a responsible homeowner and have done my best to follow the HOA's guidelines. However, when I feel that the rules are being unfairly applied or that my property rights are being violated, I'm not afraid to stand up for myself." The attorney's brow furrowed, and he pressed on. "But you must admit, Mrs. Wilkins, that your actions in this case have been anything but reasonable. Cutting a critical piece of community infrastructure is hardly the actions of a cooperative neighbor." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward in her chair. "I wouldn't have had to cut that cable if the HOA had bothered to notify me and get my consent in the first place. And let's not forget all the unjust fines and fees you've levied against me over the years. I'm simply standing up for my rights as a homeowner." The judge, who had been listening intently, cleared his throat. "Counsel, I understand your concerns, but I'm not convinced that Mrs. Wilkins is the unreasonable one here. The HOA's actions in burying that cable without her knowledge or consent do seem to be in violation of the community bylaws." The attorney's face fell, and Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had held her ground, and the judge seemed to be sympathetic to her cause. As the court adjourned for the day, Karen made her way out to the hallway, where a small crowd of her supporters had gathered. Susie rushed over to her, a look of excitement on her face. "Karen, that was amazing. The way you stood up to that arrogant lawyer. I thought he was going to have a heart attack," Susie exclaimed, grinning from ear to ear. Karen couldn't help but smile back. "Thanks, Susie. I couldn't have done it without all of your support. This fight isn't over, but I'm feeling more confident than ever that we can win this thing." The two women embraced, and Karen felt a surge of gratitude for her incredible community. Together, they were a force to be reckoned with, and she was determined to see this fight through to the end. As the court battle dragged on, Karen found herself in the spotlight, her fight against the HOA becoming a rallying cry for homeowners across the country. The local media had latched onto the story, and it wasn't long before national news outlets began to take notice. Suddenly, Karen found herself thrust into the public eye, fielding interview requests from every major news network. At first, she was hesitant, unsure of how to handle the attention, but with the unwavering support of her neighbors, she quickly found her voice. using the platform to shine a light on the abuses of power that so many homeowners faced at the hands of their HOAs. It's not just about a fiber optic cable in my yard, Karen would tell reporters, her eyes fiery with determination. It's about the fundamental rights of homeowners to have a say in what happens on their own property. The HOA system is broken, and it's time for change. Her words resonated with people across the country, and soon, Karen was being hailed as a hero, a symbol of the little guy standing up to the powers that be. The GoFundMe campaign that her neighbors had started continued to grow, with donations pouring in from all over the country. But as Karen's public profile grew, so too did the pressure from the HOA. They had hired a team of high-powered PR consultants who were working overtime to paint her as an unhinged, irrational homeowner who was jeopardizing the entire community. Mrs. Wilkins' actions have put the entire neighborhood at risk, the HOA president told one reporter, his face etched with concern. We're simply trying to make important infrastructure improvements for the benefit of all our residents, but she refuses to cooperate. Karen, of course, saw through the facade. She knew that the HOA was more concerned with maintaining their own power and control than with the well-being of the community. And she wasn't about to back down, not when she had the support of so many people behind her. As the case inched closer to a verdict, the tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch. Both sides were pulling out all the stops, throwing every legal argument they could muster at the judge. And Karen, fueled by the energy of her supporters, stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated or cowed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered his ruling, and to the shock of the HOA, he sided with Karen, declaring that their actions in burying the fiber optic cable without her consent were a clear violation of the community bylaws. As the courtroom erupted in cheers, Karen couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and relief. She had fought the good fight, and she had won, and now she was ready to take her message to the masses, determined to inspire a nationwide movement against the tyranny of HOAs. With the court ruling firmly in her favor, Karen found herself thrust even further into the national spotlight. The news of her victory against the HOA had quickly spread, and she was suddenly inundated with interview requests and speaking engagements. Initially, Karen was hesitant to embrace her newfound celebrity status. She was, after all, just a regular homeowner who had stood up for her rights. But as she listened to the stories of countless other homeowners who had faced similar battles with their HOAs, she realized that her fight had become something much larger than herself. This isn't just about me anymore, Karen told one reporter. It's about the millions of homeowners across the country who are being bullied and taken advantage of by these powerful HOA boards. And I'm not going to rest until we put an end to this abusive system. With a renewed sense of purpose, Karen began traveling the country, speaking at town halls and homeowner association meetings, sharing her story and rallying support for meaningful HOA reform. She became a darling of the national media, her face and name becoming synonymous with the fight against HOA overreach. But as her profile continued to grow, so too did the backlash from the HOA industry. Powerful lobby groups and industry associations launched coordinated attacks, painting Karen as an extremist and a threat to the stability of homeowner communities. Mrs. Wilkins is spreading misinformation and stoking fear among homeowners, one industry spokesperson claimed. HOAs play a vital role in maintaining property values and fostering a sense of community. Her crusade against them is misguided and dangerous. Karen, however, refused to be silenced. She doubled down on her message, using her platform to shine a light on the abuses and manipulations perpetrated by HOAs across the country. She highlighted stories of homeowners who had been fined or even threatened with foreclosure for minor infractions, and she called for stricter regulations and greater oversight of these powerful organizations. As the battle raged on, Karen found herself becoming a polarizing figure revered by homeowners but vilified by the HOA industry and its supporters. But she remained steadfast, driven by a deep sense of injustice and a determination to see her fight through to the end. And then, just when it seemed like the momentum was finally starting to turn in her favor, Karen received a devastating piece of news. The HOA had filed a counter lawsuit, this time alleging that her public campaign against them was slanderous and defamatory. The fight was far from over, and Karen knew that she was in for the battle of her life. As the new lawsuit loomed, Karen found herself facing a new and daunting challenge. The HOA, sensing that they were losing the PR battle, had shifted their strategy, launching a scorched earth campaign against her. The counter-lawsuit alleged that Karen's public statements and media appearances were slanderous and had caused irreparable harm to the HOA's reputation. They were seeking millions of dollars in damages, a figure that threatened to wipe out the entire community-funded legal defense campaign. Karen was devastated, but she refused to back down. She knew that the HOA was simply trying to silence her, to intimidate her into submission, but she had come too far to give up now. With renewed determination, Karen doubled down on her public campaign, using every media appearance and speaking engagement to hit back against the HOA's accusations. She painted the lawsuit as a desperate attempt to quash her free speech and maintain their stranglehold on homeowner communities. "This is not about me anymore," Karen told one news anchor. "This is about the fundamental rights of homeowners to hold their HOAs accountable. They're trying to scare me into silence. But I won't be bullied. I'll fight this in court, and I'll keep fighting in the court of public opinion." Her defiant stance resonated with homeowners across the country, and the donations to her legal defense fund poured in, eclipsing even the HOA's deep pockets. Karen knew that she had the support of a growing movement, and she was more determined than ever to see this fight through to the end. The court battle raged on, with both sides trading blows in a high-stakes legal showdown. The HOA's lawyers tried every trick in the book, but Karen and her team refused to be intimidated. They countered each allegation with evidence, and they kept the pressure on, refusing to let the HOA's tactics distract from the core issues at hand. And then, just when it seemed like the case was at an impasse, a surprise twist emerged. A whistleblower from within the HOA came forward, exposing a trove of damning evidence that showed the organization had been engaging in widespread fraud and corruption. The revelation rocked the court, and the judge was forced to rule in Karen's favor, not only dismissing the HOA's counter-lawsuit, but also ordering a comprehensive investigation into the organization's practices. As the news spread, Karen found herself at the center of a national reckoning. Homeowners across the country were inspired by her story, and they began to rise up, demanding accountability and reform from their own HOAs. For Karen, it was a bittersweet victory. She had won her fight, but the cost had been high, both personally and financially. But as she looked out over the growing movement she had helped to inspire, she knew that it had all been worth it. This was no longer just about a fiber optic cable in her yard. It was about reclaiming the rights and freedoms of homeowners everywhere, and Karen was determined to see it through to the end.